Some scandals are whispered in back rooms. Others explode under the glare of 1,000 flashbulbs. For Damien Westwood, a man who built an empire on predicting market trends, the one trend he never saw coming was his own spectacular downfall. On a night draped in diamonds and champagne at the Metropolitan Museum charity gala, he committed an act so publicly vile, so callously cruel that it would sever his life in two. He shoved his pregnant wife, Reagan, to appease his mistress. But the real story isn't the shove that the whole world saw. It's what happened hours later in the dead of night, when the gates of his own magnificent estate swung shut, and the man who thought he owned the world was escorted off his property like a common trespasser. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's a story of consequence, of a secret power held by the woman he tried to break, and the night a titan of industry learned what it truly meant to be left with nothing. The air in the grand hall of the Metropolitan Museum was thick with the scent of money, a heady perfume of expensive florals, vintage champagne, and the collective ambition of New York City's elite. It was the annual charity gala, the undisputed pinnacle of the social calendar, where fortunes were pledged on silent auction carts and reputations were made or shattered between the appetizer and the main course. From the outside, Damien and Reagan Westwood were the evening's crowning jewels. He was Damien Westwood, the CEO of Westwood Holdings, a real estate and tech conglomerate that had reshaped the city's skyline. He was tall with a mane of dark hair, just starting to silver at the temples, a feature the society pages called distinguished. His smile, a practiced lethal weapon, could close $1 billion deal or charm the most cynical journalist. Tonight he wore a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, the fabric so fine it seemed tough to drink the light. She was Reagan Westwood née Davies, where Damien was sharp angles and predatory grace. Reagan was soft-spoken elegance and quiet intelligence. An architectural historian by training, she had a discerning eye that could see the soul of a building, a skill she now applied to navigating the fragile structures of high society. Tonight, she was breathtaking in a deep sapphire gown by Oscar de la Renta that flowed over her body, artfully draping over the gentle swell of her 5-month pregnancy. A cascade of diamonds, the Westwood stars, glittered at her throat, a previous anniversary gift that now felt less like a token of love and more like a beautiful diamond-studded collar. To the casual observer, they were a portrait of success. But up close, the canvas was cracked. For the past hour, Damien had been holding court, his hand never straying far from the small of Reagan's back in a proprietary gesture that was purely for the cameras. But his eyes, those sharp, calculating grey eyes, were constantly scanning the room. Reagan knew who he was looking for. She had known for 6 agonizing months. Her name was Roxanne Croft. Roxanne was everything Reagan wasn't. She was 26 Epirona, in the guise of a social media influencer, with a manufactured pout and a body sculpted by discipline and a surgeon's knife. She'd started as a junior marketing associate at Westwood Holdings, and within a year she was on Damien's arm at private corporate events, and soon after in his bed. Tonight she was a vision in blood-red silk, a stark, deliberate contrast to Reagan's serene blue. She wasn't at their table, of course, that would be too brazen even for Damien, but she was strategically placed at a nearby one, surrounded by a coterie of sycophants, her laughter just a little too loud, her gaze a little too possessive whenever it landed on their table. Darling Damien murmured, his voice a low thrum against her ear, his breath smelling of whiskey. "You haven't said a word for 10 minutes." People will think you're bored. It wasn't a question of concern. It was a command. Perform. Reagan forced a smile, the muscles in her face feeling stiff. I'm just taking it all in, Damien. It's quite the spectacle. She took a delicate sip of her sparkling water. The baby gave a gentle flutter inside her, a small secret comfort. Gideon Pierce is staring. Damien noted his jaw tightening slightly as he glanced across the room. Gideon Pierce was his chief rival, a bulldog of a man who ran a competing firm. He looks like he's waiting for one of us to trip. Don't give him the satisfaction. Reagan's smile became a little more genuine, tinged with irony. I have no intention of tripping. The evening wore on, a torturous parade of fake smiles and stilted conversations. Reagan felt like a ghost haunting her own life. She watched Damien glad-hand a senator, his laughter booming, while she discussed 18th century Parisian architecture with a woman whose face was pulled so tight she seemed perpetually surprised. All the while, the invisible string between Damien and Roxanne seemed to pull tighter, a tangible force in the glittering room. Reagan could see the smirks they exchanged over the tops of champagne flutes, the way his eyes would follow Roxanne as she moved through the crowd. The trouble began during the live auction. A lavish 7-day yacht trip through the Greek Isles was on the block. The bidding was fierce, quickly climbing into the 6 figures. "Let's get it," Damien said, suddenly, grabbing his bidding paddle. "A baby moon. It'll be perfect." Reagan looked at him, truly looked at him for the first time all night. The suggestion was so audacious, so utterly detached from the cold reality of their marriage, that she felt a bubble of hysterical laughter rise in her throat. A baby moon, as if they were a normal, happy couple anticipating the arrival of their child, and not a man, his wife, and the spectre of his mistress, all breathing the same recycled air. Before she could form a reply, Roxanne made her move. She glided over to their table, a vision in crimson, her smile wit and predatory. "Damien, darling," she purred, completely ignoring Reagan. "My table is simply dying to know if the rumors are true. Are you really planning to break ground on the new celestial tower before Christmas?" Her hand rested familiarly on his shoulder, her long red nails a stark contrast against the black of his tuxedo. It was a power play, executed in front of God and everyone. She was marking her territory. The nearby tables fell into a hushed silence, all eyes on the tableau. This was the drama they had paid thousands of dollars to see. Damien, caught between his public image and his private indiscretions, stiffened. He was a man who hated being cornered. "Roxanne," he said, his voice a low warning. "We're in the middle of the auction." "Oh, don't be such a bore." She laughed, a tinkling sound that grated on Reagan's nerves. She leaned in closer, her lips almost touching his ear, whispering something that made a slow, dark smile spread across Damien's face. Reagan felt a cold dread wash over her. It was one thing to endure the private humiliation, the knowledge of his betrayal. It was another to have it flaunted so publicly, to be rendered invisible in her own chair, while her husband was seduced in plain sight. The baby kicked harder this time, as if sensing its mother's distress. That was it. She couldn't sit there for one more second. Slowly, gracefully, she placed her napkin on the table and rose. "If you'll excuse me," she said, her voice quiet but clear, cutting through the charged air. "I need some air." She didn't look at Damien, but she felt his irritation, a palpable wave of anger. Her leaving was an indictment, a crack in the perfect facade. She turned to walk away, her back straight, her head held high. What happened next seemed to unfold in surreal slow motion. "Regan, sit down." Damien commanded, his voice a harsh whisper. She ignored him, taking another step. Roxanne, seeing her prize momentarily distracted, chose that moment to up the ante. "Let her go, Damien. She's probably just feeling emotional. You know the hormones." She let out a small, condescending laugh. That was the spark that lit the fuse. Damien, enraged at being publicly managed by both his wife and his mistress, reacted with the brutish instinct of a cornered animal. He stood up, intending to grab Regan's arm, to physically pull her back into her seat and restore his semblance of control. But he misjudged the distance. He misjudged his own alcohol-fueled frustration. He misjudged the slight shift in Regan's balance as she turned. His hand didn't grab her arm. It shoved. It was a hard, impatient push to her shoulder. For a woman not carrying the precious weight of a child, it might have resulted in a stumble. For Regan, 5 months pregnant and caught off guard, it was catastrophic. She cried out a small gasp of shock and fear as her heel caught on the leg of a chair. She pinwheeled backwards, her arms flailing for something to hold on to. The sapphire gown swirled around her as she fell, a collapsing constellation of blue silk and shattered dignity. She landed hard on her side, the impact jarring through her entire body. The collective gasp of the hundreds of onlookers was like the sound of the tide being sucked out to sea, leaving behind a silent, horrified shore. For a moment, there was no sound but the frantic clicking of cameras as photographers, smelling blood in the water, captured the image that would be on the front page of every tabloid. By morning, Damien Westwood, titan of industry, standing over his fallen pregnant wife, while his mistress in red looked on with a flicker of triumph in her eyes. In that frozen moment, as a sharp, terrifying pain shot through her abdomen, Regan looked up at her husband. She saw no remorse in his eyes, only fury. Fury at her for creating a scene, for embarrassing him. And in his eyes, she saw the end of everything, and the beginning of something else. The silence in the grand hall lasted for what felt like an eternity, a vacuum of shock that sucked all the air from the room. Then chaos erupted. People surged to their feet. A woman screamed. Waitstaff rushed forward, their professionalism warring with their horror. Gideon Pierce, Damien's rival, was one of the first to reach Regan. He knelt beside her, his usual smug expression replaced by one of genuine concern. "Regan, are you all right? Don't move." "Someone call a doctor." Damien seemed to snap out of his stupor, the gravity of his public act finally piercing his whiskey-fueled rage. The flashbulbs were like relentless accusatory strobes, searing the moment into history. "Regan." "My God," he blustered, rushing to her side and trying to wave Pierce away. "Get away from her. It was an accident." She stumbled, but Regan wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were wide with fear. One hand instinctively clutching her stomach, where the sharp pain was now a dull, terrifying ache. 2 medically trained Gala attendees, a surgeon and a nurse, were already there, gently assessing her. "I'm fine," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if it was true. I need to go." The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that spread across her skin. The shove was bad enough. The pity in the eyes of her peers was unbearable. Damien was in full damage control mode, his voice loud and performative. "Of course, darling. Let's get you home. Everyone, please give us some space. My wife is pregnant. She just felt faint, and I tried to catch her. The lie was so bald, so pathetic, that a low murmur of disbelief rippled through the crowd. Everyone had seen it. The shove, the anger. Roxanne Croft, realizing she was now at the center of a PR nuclear blast, had already begun to discreetly melt back into the crowd, her face a mask of panicked innocence. A security detail from the museum helped Reagan to her feet. She refused to take Damien's offered hand instead, leaning on the arm of a stoic security guard. "I'll take my own car," she said, her voice low and steady, a stark contrast to Damien's frantic energy. "Don't be ridiculous, Reagan," he hissed, trying to steer her toward the exit. "We'll leave together. We need to present a united front." She stopped and looked at him. The look in her eyes was not one of sadness or betrayal. It was something colder, something harder. It was the look of a decision being made. "No, Damien. We don't." She walked away, a small, regal procession of 2 security guards and the concerned nurse, leaving him standing alone in the wreckage of his own making. The flashbulbs followed her out, but then they swung back to him, hungry for the next chapter of the drama. The ride home to their sprawling estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, was a study in transformation. The initial shock and fear for her baby began to recede, replaced by a glacial calm. The pain in her side had subsided to a throbbing reminder of the violation. But a quick, discreet call to her obstetrician from the back of the car had reassured her that unless the pain worsened or other symptoms appeared, the baby was likely cushioned and safe. The doctor's calm voice was a balm, allowing Reagan's mind to shift from fear to focus. She didn't cry. The time for tears was long past, wasted over months of lonely nights and suspicious text messages. The public humiliation was not the wound, it was the anesthetic. It had numbed her to any lingering hope, any last shred of affection she might have harbored for the man she had once loved. The shove was not an act of passion, it was an act of convenience. He had pushed her aside physically and metaphorically to clear the path to what he truly wanted. And in the silent leather-clad cocoon of the chauffeured Maybach, Reagan Westwood decided that she was done being pushed. She pulled out her phone. Her thumb hovered over her contacts before she pressed the first name. The phone only rang once. "Walter," she said, her voice perfectly even. Reagan, the voice on the other end, replied. It was her maternal grandfather, Walter Davies. He was 86, with a mind as sharp as a diamond cutter. He was old money, the quiet kind, built on patents and shrewd, century-old investments, not the flashy, brittle kind Damien represented. I saw the alert from the Times. "Are you and the little one all right?" He was always direct. "We're all right, Grandpa. A little shaken, but we're fine." "Good," he said the single word, carrying the weight of immense relief. "Then it's time." "It's time," Reagan confirmed, a sliver of steel entering her voice. "The arrangements are in place as they have been for the last year. Anya is ready. Mr. Henderson is on site. You just need to give the word." "Consider it given," she said. "I'm 10 minutes out." "I'm proud of you, Kate," he said, softly. "Your grandmother would be too. She never did like men who confused bluster with strength." A single hot tear finally escaped Reagan's eye, but she wiped it away fiercely. "Thank you, Grandpa. I'll call you tomorrow." She disconnected and immediately dialed her second number. "Anya Sharma speaking." The voice was crisp, efficient, and devoid of fluff. Anya was the head of family law at the most fearsome legal firm in the state. Anya. It's Reagan Westwood. Reagan. I've been alerted. Walter called me a few minutes ago. Are you certain? He shoved me Anya. He shoved his pregnant wife in front of 200 people so his mistress wouldn't be inconvenienced. Reagan stated the facts, laid out like cold, hard evidence. I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Understood, Anya said. The morality clause of the prenuptial agreement is now active. The paperwork is prepared. Mr. Henderson of Citadel Security has been given his instructions, effective upon your arrival at the property. All assets held within the Davies family trust, including the Greenwich estate and its contents, are now under your sole and exclusive control. His access has been revoked. Reagan closed her eyes, a wave of dizzying finality washing over her. Thank you, Anya. Just get inside and lock the doors, Reagan. We'll handle the rest. Meanwhile, Damien was in his own car, fuming. Roxanne was beside him, having slithered out a side exit to meet him. Can you believe the nerve of her? Roxanne fumed, reapplying her lipstick in the vanity mirror. Walking out like that, making you look like a monster. She's so manipulative. Damien wasn't listening. He was on the phone with his head of PUR, a man named Rick. Just kill it, Damien snarled into the phone. I don't care what it costs. Call the editors. Call the publishers. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. A dizzy spell, I was helping her. Damien, it's everywhere. Rick's panicked voice crackled back. Video is already going viral. Billionaire shoves pregnant wife. It's not good. Then make it good, he roared, throwing his phone onto the opposite seat in disgust. He rubbed his temples, the whiskey buzz, having curdled into a vicious headache. He was furious with Reagan. How dare she embarrass him like this? He'd smooth it over, of course. He always did. He'd buy her a new necklace, a bigger one this time. Maybe a car. She'd cry a little, he'd apologize with half-hearted sincerity. And then life would go on. He was Damien Westwood. Life always went on his terms. Don't worry, baby, Roxanne cooed, sliding her hand onto his thigh. She'll get over it. Once you're home, you can handle her. Yeah, Damien muttered, his confidence slowly returning. Yeah, I'll handle her. 40 minutes later, his Bentley crested the hill leading to his estate. The place was his sanctuary, his monument to himself. A 25,000-square-foot Georgian mansion on 50 acres of pristine Connecticut waterfront. He'd supervised every detail of its renovation after he and Reagan had married. It was the ultimate symbol of his power. As they approached the main gates, massive wrought-iron monstrosities, he pressed the remote. Nothing happened. He pressed it again, harder this time. The gates remained shut. What the hell, he muttered. He could see the lights on in the main house, a warm, inviting glow against the night sky. Reagan's Maybach was parked in the circular driveway. He laid on the horn, a long, angry blast. After a moment, a figure emerged from the gatehouse, not the usual friendly night guard, but a man in a severe black suit. Damien recognized him vaguely. Mr. Henderson, the head of the private security firm Reagan's family used for their various properties. Henderson walked calmly to the driver's side window. Damien powered it down his face, a mask of indignation. Henderson, what's the problem? Open the damn gate. Mr. Henderson looked at him with an unnervingly calm expression. His eyes were flat, impassive. He held a tablet in his hand. "Good evening, Mr. Westwood," he said, his voice polite but firm. "I'm afraid I can't do that." Damien stared at him, dumbfounded. "What do you mean you can't do that? I own this place. You work for me." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Henderson's lips. "That is a common misconception, sir. My firm, Citadel Security, is contracted by the Davies Family Trust, which is the legal owner of this property. My duty is to the trust and its designated beneficiary." Roxanne in the passenger seat looked confused. "The what?" Damien felt a cold knot of dread begin to form in his stomach. "What the hell are you talking about?" "This is my house, according to the legal directives I received at 9:47 p.m. this evening from Ms. Anya Sharma on behalf of the beneficiary, Mrs. Reagan Westwood." Henderson continued his tone, as unforgiving as a legal document. "Your access privileges to this property have been permanently revoked." He turned his head slightly, gesturing back toward the mansion that glowed under the moonlight, a fortress Damien himself had perfected. Mr. Westwood Henderson said, his voice dropping to a quiet, final tone. "You are no longer welcome on this property. I must ask you to leave immediately." Damien stared at Mr. Henderson, the polite, firm words failing to penetrate the thick wall of his indignation. The world as Damien Westwood knew it did not operate this way. Gates opened for him, doors unlocked, people yielded. The suggestion that he, in his own driveway, at the foot of his own palatial home, could be denied entry was so fundamentally absurd it bordered on the comical. "Are you insane?" Damien's voice was dangerously low, a coiled serpent of fury. "This is a joke, a stupid, vindictive little game Reagan is playing because she's hormonal and embarrassed. I demand you put her on the intercom. Now!" Mr. Henderson, a man whose placid expression suggested he had faced down far worse than an irate billionaire, did not move a muscle. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, a monolith in a perfectly tailored suit. "Mrs. Westwood has left explicit instructions not to be disturbed, sir. She is resting." "Resting?" Damien let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. "She's not resting. She's plotting. This is pathetic, even for her." He leaned out the window, his face contorted with scorn. "Henderson, let's be clear. My name is on the checks that pay your salary. My company's security contracts are worth millions. You work for me. Now, for the last time, open this damn gate before I make one phone call and ensure you're directing traffic in a mall parking lot in Ohio by tomorrow morning." The threat, one that had humbled senators and terrified rivals, simply dissipated in the cool night air. Henderson's expression remained unchanged, but there was a subtle shift in his eyes, a glint of something that looked almost like pity. "That is a common misconception," Sir Henderson said, his tone as even as a frozen lake. "My firm, Citadel Security, is not contracted by you nor by Westwood Holdings. Our client is and has always been the Davies Family Trust." The words hung in the space between them. From the passenger seat, Roxanne, who had been watching the exchange with a mixture of amusement and impatience, finally spoke up. "The what? What is he talking about?" "Damien. A trust." Damien ignored her. A cold, slithering dread was beginning to snake its way up his spine, far more chilling than the night air. The Davies Family Trust. He remembered the name from the mountain of paperwork he'd blithely signed before the wedding. He had assumed it was some dusty old entity managing Reagan's inheritance, a few stocks, maybe a summer cottage in Maine. Nothing of consequence. The trust owns this property. Mr. Westwood Henderson continued, as if sensing the gears of confusion and horror grinding in Damien's mind. It has been the legal owner for over 60 years. Your wife Regan, as the primary beneficiary, holds sole authority over residential access. As of approximately 1 hour ago, she invoked her rights under that authority. He lifted a tablet, the screen glowing with what looked like a legal document. According to the directive I received at 9:47 p.m. this evening from Ms. Anya Sharma, on behalf of Mrs. Westwood, your access privileges to the property at 1100 Cove Road, and all associated structures have been permanently and irrevocably revoked. Revoked. The word was a hammer blow. It was the word used for credit cards, for driver's licenses, for disgraced memberships. It was not a word that applied to him. This is theft, Damien sputtered, his voice cracking. I renovated this house. I poured a fortune into it. The marble in that foyer is from a quarry in Carrara. I selected myself. That's my home. With all due respect, sir. Henderson said, his voice retaining its maddening calm. You have been residing here as a guest of Mrs. Westwood. A long-term guest, certainly, but a guest nonetheless. A guest. The word struck him with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. For 5 years he had strode through those halls, hosted global figures, and ruled his domain with the absolute certainty of an emperor. And all along in the cold, hard letter of the law, he had been nothing more than a visitor. A guest who had just committed the ultimate faux pas at the dinner party. His phone buzzed violently in the center console, a frantic, angry vibration. He snatched it up, desperate for a lifeline, a connection to the world where he was still in charge. The caller ID was a name he knew, but had never spoken to. Anya Sharma, Regan's lawyer. He jabbed the screen to answer his voice, a venomous hiss. You've got a lot of damn nerve, Mr. Westwood. Anya's voice was as cool, sharp, and sterile as a surgeon's scalpel. I trust Mr. Henderson has explained the immediate situation. I am simply calling to formalize it, so there are no lingering misunderstandings that might lead to any unpleasantness with law enforcement. Unpleasantness? Damien's voice rose to a near shriek. You've locked me out of my house. Correction, Anya said, her tone clinical. We have secured Mrs. Westwood's house, as per the prenuptial agreement you signed on May the 12th, 2020. I'd refer you to Section 4, subsection B, regarding acts of public humiliation or physical endangerment directed at either party. A breach of this clause, as has been witnessed by several hundred individuals and countless recording devices this evening, triggers several non-negotiable consequences, the first of which is Mrs. Westwood's right to exclusive and immediate possession of her primary residence. I'll fight this. Damien seethed the words, feeling hollow, even as he said them. I'll drag this through every court in the country. I'll bleed you dry. A faint dry sound came through the phone. Something that might have been a humorless chuckle. I wouldn't advise that. Discovery would be extensive. But since you brought up finances, let's talk about your renovations. We have meticulous records of your expenditures. The prenuptial agreement is quite clear. Any financial contributions to pre-existing non-marital assets are to be legally defined as gifts to the trust. It was very generous of you, Mr. Westwood. You've significantly increased the value of your wife's property. The sheer calculated brilliance of it was suffocating. He had been outmaneuvered from the very beginning, checkmated by a quiet old man, and a legal document he had dismissed as a trifle. Now Anya's voice turned a shade harder. Mr. Henderson, as an agent of the trust, has the authority to have you cited for trespassing. Given the events of tonight, I imagine your board of directors would prefer you not add a mugshot to your burgeoning public relations crisis. I strongly advise you to leave quietly. A courier will deliver the full legal notice to your office in the morning. Good night, Mr. Westwood. The line went dead, leaving a silence in the car that was louder than any shouting. Damien sat clutching his phone, his knuckles white. He was breathing heavily, his mind a maelstrom of rage, humiliation, and burgeoning panic. He stared past Henderson's impassive form at the mansion on the hill. His kingdom. The warm lights in the windows, which had seemed so inviting moments before, now felt like triumphant eyes mocking him. He could picture Reagan inside, perhaps standing by the grand bay window in the living room, watching this entire pathetic drama unfold. The image was so emasculating it made him physically ill. Damien Roxanne's voice was small, tentative, laced with a fear that was rapidly replacing her earlier excitement. The fantasy of the all-powerful billionaire was crumbling before her very eyes. The man beside her wasn't a titan. He was a man arguing with a security guard, a man being lectured by a lawyer over the phone. The allure of his power was predicated on it being absolute. This was pathetic. So what do we do? Where do we go? He turned to look at her. Really look at her for the first time since they'd left the gala. Her face, framed by the garish red of her dress, was a mask of naked, opportunistic concern. She wasn't worried about him. She was worried about her situation, about what this collapse meant for her. She was the catalyst, the cheap thrill for which he had just incinerated his entire life. A wave of revulsion, directed as much at himself as at her, washed over him. He spat the word, dripping with venom. There is no we. There was never a we. You were a diversion, an accessory, and now you're an accomplice to a disaster. Roxanne recoiled, her carefully constructed pout twisting into a snarl of indignation. How is this my fault? You were the one who pushed your pregnant wife in front of the entire world. Because of you, he roared, finally unleashing the full force of his frustration on the only available target. Because you couldn't stay at your table. You had to come over. You had to perform to stake your claim on something that was never yours. You're nothing but a cheap, ambitious parasite, and you're a fool. She shot back, her voice rising. A weak fool who just got outplayed by the little wife you thought you could walk all over. You're not powerful, Damien. You're just a bully who lost control. Her words hit him harder than any of Anya Sharma's legal jargon. He stared at her, his chest heaving. Get out! What she whispered, her bravado vanishing. Get out of my car. He enunciated each word with cold, deliberate fury. Her face crumpled. You can't be serious. You're just going to leave me here, on the side of the road in the middle of the night. I don't have a home to take you to. Do I? He sneered, the cruelty a balm on his wounded pride. You wanted the thrill of sleeping with a king. Well, the king has just been dethroned at his own gate. The thrill is gone. Call an Uber. I'm sure your followers would love the story. With a sound that was half a sob and half a gasp of outrage, Roxanne scrambled out of the Bentley. She stood on the perfectly manicured grass verge, her crimson dress a slash of color against the darkness, shivering as the reality of her situation set in. Damien didn't give her a second glance. He wrenched the steering wheel, the Bentley executing a savage three-point turn, its expensive tires squealing a protest on the pristine asphalt. He sped away into the darkness, leaving Roxanne, Mr. Henderson, and his entire life behind him. As he drove, his phone began to light up with a relentless barrage of calls. The chairman of his board, his CFO, his frantic head of PR, he ignored them all. He was a ship taking on water, and the rats were calling to ask why the deck was wet. Inside the mansion, the heavy front door clicked shut. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home echoing in the cavernous marble foyer. Reagan stood there for a long moment in the silence, her back pressed against the cool wood. She closed her eyes, taking a deep, shuddering breath. It was done. She walked slowly through the ground floor, her hand trailing along the wall. This was the space Damien had remade in his own image, all gleaming surfaces, sharp angles, and cold, imposing art. He had stripped away the warmth her grandmother had cultivated, calling it cluttered and dated. He had called it an upgrade. Now Reagan saw it for what it was, a hollow monument to a hollow man. From the bay window in the living room, shrouded in darkness, she could see the distant red taillights of the Bentley as it sped away down the long, winding drive. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a profound, aching sadness for the man she had once loved, and an immense, bone-deep relief that the ordeal was finally over. She placed a hand on her belly, where her child rested safe and unaware. "It's just us now, little one," she whispered into the quiet of the house, "and we're going to be okay." She was no longer a guest. She was the protector of this house, this legacy, and the future growing inside her. She had finally come home. The first light of dawn was a dirty grey filtering through the blackout curtains of the hotel suite. Damien Westwood woke with a jolt, his heart hammering against his ribs. For a disorienting moment, he didn't know where he was. The air was stale, smelling of old room service and expensive whiskey. This wasn't his bedroom with its vaulted ceiling and panoramic views of the Long Island Sound. This was a sterile, anonymous cage. Then the events of the previous night crashed down on him with the force of a physical blow. The glittering gala, the condescending laugh from Roxanne, the look of shock on Reagan's face, the sickening thud of her fall, and the final ignominious standoff at the gates of his own home. He stumbled out of bed, his custom tuxedo a wrinkled, pathetic shell of its former glory. He flicked on the giant television, hoping for a distraction, but found only an echo chamber of his own ruin. Every major news network was leading with his story. There it was, on a massive high-definition screen, the video. A high-angle shot from a guest's phone, grainy, but undeniable. The shove. It was brutal, unequivocal. There was no room for interpretation, no way to spin it as an accident. A panel of talking heads dissected his character, like vultures. A shocking display of arrogance and cruelty, one commentator said. This goes beyond a marital dispute. It speaks to a fundamental flaw in judgment, another added. The ticker at the bottom of the screen told the rest of the story. Westwood Holdings, WSTW, plummets in pre-market trading amid CEO scandal. He felt a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. They were crucifying him. He, Damien Westwood, who had bent this city to his will, was being reduced to a 2-minute segment on morning television. He snatched his phone, his thumb flying to Reagan's contact. He needed to fix this, to command her to release a joint statement to make this go away. The call went straight to a voicemail he didn't recognize. "You have reached the voicemail of Reagan Davies," her voice said, calm and impossibly professional. "Please leave a message. Davies." She had dropped his name. The finality of it was like a door slamming shut in a long, dark hallway. He called again, and again. Each time the same cool, detached voice met him, a stranger who had once shared his bed. His next call was to his lawyer, Frank Levine, a legal brawler known for his scorched earth tactics. Frank Damien barked, pacing the plush carpet. "I want you to destroy her. File everything. Contest the prenup. I don't care what it costs. I want the house. I want my life back." There was a heavy sigh on the other end of the line. "Damien, I got the courier delivery from Anya Sharma an hour ago. I'm looking at the agreement now. You need to listen to me very carefully." Frank's voice, usually full of bluster, was sober. "This document, it's a fortress. It was drafted by Walter Davies's personal firm. These guys don't draft contracts. They build legal cathedrals. The Greenwich estate was never a marital asset. It was deeded to a multi-generational irrevocable trust for Reagan's benefit, before you were even in the picture. Your name isn't on a single page. I put $30 million into that house." Damien roared, the injustice of it burning in his throat. "I know. And the prenup you signed has a clause. I'm reading it right now that any financial or material contributions to non-marital assets are to be considered irrevocable gifts with no expectation of reimbursement." Frank's voice was grim. "You paid for your own cage, Damien. Generously." Damien sank onto the edge of the unmade bed, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a cold dread. "Fine. She can have the house, a pile of bricks. What about my company?" "My actual assets." That Frank said, his voice dropping lower, is where the real demolition begins. "You remember the morality clause, the one your previous counsel flagged and you called quaint?" Damien remembered. He had laughed, picturing some dusty, Victorian-era standard of behavior. "Well," Frank continued, "it's not quaint. It's a nuclear weapon. For a publicly witnessed breach, and believe me, a video on every news channel counts as witnessed, the wronged party is entitled to a punitive settlement. It awards Reagan 50% of all assets accumulated during the marriage." He paused, letting the weight of the next words land. And her counsel, the formidable Ms. Sharma, is defining assets as the total appreciation in the market value of your Westwood Holdings stock from the date of your wedding until yesterday. The air left Damien's lungs. The company's valuation had grown by nearly $4 billion in the 5 years he'd been married. 50% of that. The number was astronomical, unthinkable. It was a mortal wound to his fortune. She can't, he stammered. "She doesn't know the first thing about finance." "She doesn't have to," Frank countered tiredly. "She has Walter Davies, and he, my friend, knows everything." While Damien was absorbing the scale of his financial ruin, Reagan was sitting in the sun-drenched morning room of the Greenwich estate. The house was quiet, the frantic energy of the previous night having given way to a profound calm. A cup of herbal tea steamed on the table beside her. Her hand rested on her belly, a protective, constant gesture. She wasn't celebrating. There was no triumphant joy, only the solemn weight of a necessary amputation. Her grandfather, Walter, sat across from her, his aged hands wrapped around his own cup. He had arrived at dawn. "Anya has made the preliminary call to the board's chairman," he said, his voice gentle. "They're in a state of panic. The stock is in freefall. They need a solution, and they need one now. Reagan looked out the window at the gardens. She had so carefully helped design the gardens Damien had always referred to as his. I don't want the company, Grandpa. I never did. I don't want his name. I don't want his world. I just want him gone. I want to build a safe, quiet life for this baby. I know, Kate Walter said, his eyes full of a deep, fierce pride. And that is precisely what we will secure for you. This isn't about revenge. It is about consequences. It's about ensuring the wolf you've ejected from the house can't circle back and tear it down. Anya Sharma joined them via a secure video call. Her face was all business. The board meeting is scheduled for tomorrow. They've suspended Damien, but they're adrift. They fear a hostile takeover from your end. Then we must reassure them. Reagan said, her voice finding a new strength. Present the terms, Anya. His complete and permanent removal. In exchange, I will place my shares, my leverage, into a blind trust. Its only directive will be to ensure the company's stability. I'm not a corporate raider. I'm a mother protecting her future. It was a masterful strategy. She wasn't seizing power. She was restoring order. She was cauterizing the wound that Damien had inflicted, saving the livelihoods of thousands of employees and the investments of shareholders. She was doing what a real CEO should. The news of his termination came via a cold, 2-sentence email the following afternoon. He was no longer CEO, president, or chairman of Westwood Holdings. A buyout of his remaining shares was being processed. He was out, cast out from the empire he had built with his own 2 hands. The subsequent weeks were a descent into a grey, featureless hell. His life, once a whirlwind of high-stakes meetings and glamorous events, shrank to the 4 walls of the hotel suite. The calls from his board stopped, replaced by calls from Roxanne's lawyer, negotiating the price of her silence. He wired the money without a second thought, a pathetic severance package for a relationship that had cost him everything. Roxanne Croft vanished from the face of the earth, her social media wiped clean, a ghost in a blood-red dress. He read that Gideon Pierce had successfully poached 2 of his top project managers. The wolves were circling the wounded beast. He hit his absolute nadir one rainy Tuesday, nearly a month after the gala. The hotel room was a mess, the air thick with the smell of despair. He was unshaven, drinking a glass of whiskey that might as well have been water, and aimlessly scrolling through a financial news site. And then he saw it. It wasn't a paparazzi shot, but a photo from a local Greenwich publication. The headline read, "Reagan Davies pledges support for new prenatal care wing at Greenwich Hospital." In the photo, Reagan stood at a podium. Her pregnancy was obvious now, a beautiful central part of her. She wore a simple cream-colored dress, and her face, free of the heavy makeup she'd worn for society events, was serene. She wasn't smiling exactly, but her expression was one of profound peace and purpose. She looked strong, healthy, and completely unshakably whole. He stared at the image, the whiskey glass frozen halfway to his lips. The last vestiges of his anger, his denial, his self-pity, didn't just crumble. They evaporated. In their place was a hollow, echoing clarity that was more painful than any rage. He saw the woman in the photo, and remembered the girl he'd first met at an architectural fundraiser, brilliant, passionate, with a laugh that could light up a room. He had been drawn to that light, but over the years he had done everything in his power to dim it, to make it fit into the small ornamental box he required for a wife. He had mistaken her kindness for weakness, her quiet nature for passivity, her grace for submission. He had been given a masterpiece, and he had treated it like a cheap print, ready to be discarded for a newer, flashier model. The mansion, the company, the status he saw now that they were all props on a stage. The real treasure had been Regan herself and the new life she was carrying, and he had shoved it all aside. He finally understood. That night, when the gates had refused to open and Mr. Henderson had turned him away, it wasn't just about a legal document. It was a metaphor for his entire life. He had never truly been the master of the castle. He was just a guest in Regan's house, a guest in a life of quiet dignity he had never earned, and a guest in the presence of a strength he was too arrogant to ever recognize. Security hadn't just escorted him out of a mansion. They had escorted him out of a life he had never truly deserved and could now never get back. And so Damien Westwood's gilded world came crashing down, not with a prolonged war, but with the quiet, decisive click of a gate he could no longer open. His story is a stark, brutal reminder that true power isn't about the name on a skyscraper or the balance in a bank account. It's about the foundations we build our lives upon. Damien built his on arrogance and betrayal, while Regan, in her quiet way, stood upon a foundation of legacy intelligence and a prenuptial agreement he was too proud to read. He thought he was the king, but he was merely a guest in the Queen's castle. And when the time came, she simply and irrevocably changed the locks. What do you think was Regan's move, a brilliant act of self-preservation or cold-blooded revenge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of downfall and hidden strength, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who loves a good drama, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories where consequences always eventually come knocking. Thank you for listening. The anonymous email landed in my inbox at 2:17 a.m. The subject line was just 2 words, St. Jude's. Inside there was no text, only a link. A link to a video that would detonate my life. It was raw, grainy security footage from the maternity ward of the very hospital where my husband Michael had supposedly mourned the loss of our stillborn son just 3 weeks earlier. But the video didn't show a grieving father. It showed a man I barely recognized, his face etched, not with sorrow, but with a chilling, frantic energy. And the woman he was, with her hand clutching his. That woman wasn't me. They say the truth sets you free. But as I watched that footage, all I felt was the cold, hard reality of a lie so monstrous it would unravel not just a marriage, but the very fabric of who I thought we were. My world, the one I had so meticulously curated, was painted in shades of beige and pottery barn. It was a world of scented candles, Sunday brunches, and the soft cashmere-wrapped dream of impending motherhood. Michael and I were that couple, the ones whose Christmas cards made other people vaguely resentful. He was a successful architect, all sharp lines and even sharper suits, with a smile that could disarm a hostile boardroom. I was a freelance graphic designer, a profession that allowed me the flexibility to nest, to obsess over paint swatches for the nursery, and to scroll endlessly through baby name forums. Our life in our sprawling suburban home just outside of Austin, Texas, was a testament to shared ambition, and I thought shared love. We'd met in college, a whirlwind romance that had settled into the comfortable rhythm of a decade-long marriage. We'd weathered his demanding career, my brief but intense flirtation with opening a bakery, and the quiet, creeping anxiety of trying for a baby. When the 2 pink lines finally appeared on the pregnancy test, it felt less like a surprise and more like a hard-won victory. Michael had wept. He'd dropped to his knees and pressed his ear to my still flat stomach, whispering promises to our unborn child. He was an exemplary, expectant father. He assembled the crib with an engineer's precision, attended every Lamaze class, and learned to expertly massage my swollen ankles. He'd talk to my belly for hours, telling our son, whom we'd already named Caleb, about the world he was about to enter. The pregnancy was, for the most part, idyllic. I'd lean into the stereotype craving pickles and ice cream, and Michael would dutifully make midnight runs to the 24-hour grocery store. Our friends Mark and Sarah, who had 2 boisterous toddlers of their own, would watch us with a knowing, almost pitying fondness. "Just you wait," Mark would chuckle, ruffling Michael's hair. "Sleep now. You'll thank me later." The first fissure in our perfect world appeared so subtly, I almost missed it. It was a Tuesday afternoon, about a month before my due date. Michael called, his voice strained. "Sweetheart, I have to fly out to Chicago. A last-minute thing with the Harrison project. A major investor is threatening to pull out." Chicago now. I'd asked, a knot of disappointment tightening in my chest. We had a birthing class that evening. "I know, I'm so sorry, Amelia. I wouldn't go if it wasn't a 5-alarm fire. I'll be back Thursday, I promise. I love you. I love you both." He was so convincing, so genuinely apologetic, that I'd pushed my unease aside. It was his job. It was our future. But then, a few days after he was supposed to have returned, I was scrolling through Instagram. A girl I'd gone to college with, a bubbly blonde named Chloe Jenkins, who now worked in PR in Chicago, had posted a story. A picture of a crowded, trendy cocktail bar, the kind with Edison bulbs and artisanal gin, and there in the background, unmistakable even in the blurry periphery, was Michael. He was laughing, his head tilted back, a drink in his hand. He wasn't in a suit. He was wearing a casual Henley, the one I always said brought out the blue in his eyes. And his arm was draped casually around the shoulders of a striking redhead I'd never seen before. My blood ran cold. I took a screenshot, my fingers trembling. When I confronted him, showing him the picture, he didn't even flinch. He looked at me with those earnest blue eyes and laughed. A short, dismissive sound. "Amy, sweetheart, you're seeing things. That's not even me." "Michael, I know what you look like. It's a blurry photo. It's some guy who looks like me." And Chloe. "You know, she's always been a bit of a drama queen. Probably just trying to stir something up." He pulled me into a hug, stroking my hair. "You're hormonal, baby. It's okay. I was in meetings the entire time. I was miserable. I missed you and Caleb every second." He was so good. So plausible. He showed me his expense reports. A string of Uber rides to a bland corporate office park, a dinner for one at a generic steakhouse. He had an answer for everything. I wanted to believe him. The alternative was a chasm I wasn't ready to face. So I let it go. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of the impending birth was making me irrational. I deleted the screenshot. I apologized. And I tucked the incident away in a dark corner of my mind, a place I refused to visit. 2 weeks later, I went into labor. It was premature, a full 3 weeks early, but the doctors at St. Jude's Medical Center weren't overly concerned. The contractions came hard and fast. Michael was by my side, a rock. He held my hand. He breathed with me. He whispered encouragement. He was the perfect husband, the perfect father-to-be. The hours blurred into a haze of pain and fear. There were complications. The baby's heart rate was dropping. The calm, reassuring voices of the nurses started to take on a sharper edge. The room filled with more people. I remember the anesthesiologist's kind eyes, the cold sting of the epidural. I remember the doctor, a woman with a stern but compassionate face, saying, "We need to get him out now." Then nothing. A black, empty void. I woke up in a quiet, dimly lit room. The first thing I noticed was the silence. The rhythmic beeping of the monitors was gone. The bustling energy of the labor ward had been replaced by a heavy, oppressive stillness. Michael was slumped in a chair by my bed, his face buried in his hands. His shoulders were shaking. "Michael?" My voice was a dry, raspy whisper. He looked up, and his face broke me. It was a mask of utter devastation. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. Tears streamed down his cheeks unheeded. "He's gone, Amy." He choked out, his voice thick with a grief so profound it seemed to suck the air from the room. "Caleb, he didn't make it." The words didn't compute. They were just sounds, meaningless syllables that my brain refused to assemble into a coherent thought. I looked down at my body, at the flat expanse of my stomach beneath the thin hospital blanket. The life that had been there, the kicks and flutters that had become the rhythm of my days, was gone. The doctor came in and explained it in gentle clinical terms. Placental abruption, a rare catastrophic event. There was nothing anyone could have done. It was no one's fault. They were so sorry for my loss. The days that followed were a blur of unimaginable pain. I was a ghost, haunting the corridors of my own life. The nursery, once a room of joyful anticipation, became a mausoleum. Every tiny onesie, every perfectly folded blanket was a dagger to my heart. Michael was my shadow, my keeper. He handled everything. The hospital paperwork, the funeral arrangements, a small private service that I was too sedated to fully comprehend. He fielded the calls from concerned friends and family. He held me when I woke up screaming in the night. He seemed to be drowning in his own sea of grief. He lost weight. Dark circles appeared under his eyes. He'd sit for hours in the rocking chair in the nursery, just staring at the empty crib. He was the very picture of a bereaved father, and I clung to him. His grief was the only thing that validated my own. We were in this together, two shipwrecked survivors on a desolate shore. Our shared loss was the fragile raft that kept us afloat. I needed his pain to be as real as mine. It was the only thing that made sense in a world that had suddenly cruelly stopped making sense. The lie was perfect. It was seamless, comprehensive, and utterly devastatingly believable. He had built a fortress of sorrow around us, and I, his willing prisoner, had never once thought to check if the walls were real. The first 3 weeks after we lost Caleb were a suffocating fog. Time became a fluid, meaningless concept marked only by the rising and setting of the sun, which I mostly observed from the cocoon of my bed. Michael was my constant, my warden of grief. He brought me meals I didn't eat, coaxed me into showers I didn't want, and filled the silence with a steady stream of soothing, empty words. "We'll get through this, Amy. He'll always be our son. I love you so much." His performance was flawless. He never missed a beat. When my mother came to stay for a week, her own face a mirror of my sorrow, she'd watch Michael with tear-filled eyes. "You're a good man, Michael," she'd whispered to him in the kitchen one afternoon, a moment I overheard from the top of the stairs. "Thank God Amelia has you." He'd even begun to channel his grief into a project. He announced one evening, his voice heavy but resolute, that he was designing a memorial garden for the hospital, a place for parents like us. He'd said, his gaze distant, a place to remember the children we never got to hold. He'd spend hours at his drafting table, sketching intricate plans for fountains and benches and flower beds. It was all so noble, so heartbreakingly poignant. But grief is a strange and unpredictable beast. In its initial all-consuming phase, it blinds you. But as the raw, visceral agony begins to recede, even slightly, a new kind of clarity can emerge. Your senses, dulled by shock, slowly begin to sharpen. You start to notice things, small things, inconsistencies. The first crack was small, almost imperceptible. It was a bill, an itemized statement from the hospital. I'd found it in the mail which Michael had taken to sorting through before I saw it, to protect you from any unnecessary stress, he'd said. This one had apparently slipped through his filtration system. I scanned the list of charges, a morbid curiosity compelling me to relive the trauma in black and white. Anesthesia, operating room fees, pharmacy. And then a line item that made me pause. NICU, level 3 care, 3 days. NICU, neonatal intensive care unit. I frowned. Why would Caleb have been in the NICU? The doctor had been clear. It was a stillbirth. He was gone before he was born. There was no care, intensive or otherwise. I assumed it was a clerical error, a common enough occurrence in the bureaucratic labyrinth of healthcare. But the detail lodged itself in my mind, a tiny burr under the skin. The second crack appeared a few days later. Sarah, my best friend, came over bearing a casserole and a bottle of wine she knew I wouldn't drink. She sat with me on the couch, letting the silence hang comfortably between us, before she finally spoke. "How are you really?" she asked, her voice gentle. I gave her my standard, non-committal answer. "Getting by." She nodded, her eyes full of a sympathy that for the first time felt a little off. There was something else there, a hesitation, a flicker of pity. No, that wasn't it. It was something closer to discomfort. "Amy," she began, choosing her words carefully. "When Michael called us from the hospital, he was a wreck. Mark and we wanted to come right away, but Michael was so insistent. He said you didn't want to see anyone, that you needed space." "I did," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I couldn't face anyone." "I get that," she said quickly. "Of course I do. But he said something else. Something odd." I waited, my body tensing. "He said that they had Caleb on life support," she said, her brow furrowed in confusion. "He said you were both just waiting, making a decision. He was asking Mark about what that was like to let go." The casserole on my lap suddenly felt like a lead weight. Life support. A decision. This was a narrative I hadn't heard, a version of the story that diverged wildly from the one I had been told. "He must have been confused," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "He was in shock. We all were." "Of course," Sarah said immediately, backing down, sensing my distress. "That must be it. Oh, Amy, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have even brought it up. It stuck with me." But it stuck with me, too. It joined the NICU charge, another piece of a puzzle I didn't know I was solving. That night I couldn't sleep. The image of Michael on the phone with Mark, fabricating a story about our son on life support, played on a loop in my head. Why? Why would he lie about something so specific, so sacred? Was his grief so profound it had created false memories? Or was it something else, the memory of the Instagram photo from Chicago, the one I had so willingly dismissed, resurfaced with a vengeance? The laughing man with his arm around the redhead. You're hormonal, baby. It's some guy who looks like me. My hands started to tremble. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Michael, who was sleeping soundly, a picture of peaceful exhaustion. I tiptoed into his home office, the room where he was designing his memorial garden, a sanctuary of his supposed sorrow. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the silent house. I didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew I had to look. His laptop was closed on his desk. I opened it. It was password protected, of course. I tried our anniversary. Nothing. I tried my birthday. Nothing. I tried Caleb. The screen unlocked. A wave of nausea washed over me, using our dead son's name as a password. The thought was both sickening and, in a twisted way, perfectly in character with the grieving father he was pretending to be. His email was already open. I felt a pang of guilt, a lifetime of respecting his privacy, warring with the gnawing suspicion that was now consuming me. I clicked on his sent folder. There were emails to contractors about the memorial garden, emails to his colleagues, thanking them for their condolences. And then I saw it. A thread of emails with a woman named Jenna. Jenna Reed. My breath hitched. The redhead from the Instagram photo. The emails went back months. They started professionally enough, something about a joint project between his firm and hers in Chicago. But the tone quickly shifted. They became familiar, flirty, intimate. They talked about meeting for drinks for dinner. They talked about her recent divorce. They talked about how alive he felt when he was with her. I scrolled down, my vision blurring with tears. The dates were a brutal chronological indictment. There was an email from the day he'd supposedly flown to Chicago for his 5-alarm fire meeting. From Michael Davenport to Jenna Reed. Subject: on my way, wheels up. Can't wait to see you. Counting the minutes. Ditch the boring conference dinner tonight. I found a place I think you'll love. And then I found the emails from the week Caleb had died. He'd been emailing her from the hospital, while I was in labor, while I was in surgery, while I was lying in a drugged haze, believing he was by my side, drowning in grief. From Michael Davenport to Jenna Reed. Subject: it's happening. Amelia's in labor. It's early. This is it. Talk soon. Then a few hours later. From Michael Davenport to Jenna Reed. Subject: it's happening. It's a nightmare here. Complications. Don't know what's going on. I'll call you when I can. And then the email that made me physically recoil, a gasp escaping my lips. It was sent the morning after I'd been told our son was gone. From Michael Davenport to Jenna Reed. Subject: I need you. It's over. He didn't make it. It's for the best. I know we talked about this, the timing. It would have been impossible, but God, Jenna, it's still... I can't explain it. She's a mess. I have to be the strong one here. I have to play the part. But all I can think about is you. All I want is to be with you. This whole thing, It just makes me realize I can't live this lie anymore. As soon as I can, I'm coming to you. It's for the best. The timing. It would have been impossible. I have to play the part." The words swam before my eyes. The fortress he had built crumbled around me, and I saw the lie for what it was. It wasn't about shared grief. It was about an affair. It was about an exit strategy. The death of our son wasn't a tragedy he was enduring with me. It was a complication he was managing. A messy, loose end he needed to tie up so he could move on to his new life, his new woman. The NICU charge. The story about life support to Sarah and Mark. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. These weren't the ramblings of a grief-stricken mind. They were lies. Scaffolding to support a bigger, more monstrous lie. He needed a story that was dramatic, that required his constant attention, that isolated me, and made him the heroic, grieving husband. A story that bought him time. My grief, which had been a raw, open wound, was suddenly eclipsed by a rage so white-hot, it was almost dizzying. The man sleeping in my bed, the man whose tears I had wiped away, the man whose hand I had clung to, as if it were a lifeline, was a stranger, a monster. I closed the laptop, my movements stiff and robotic. I walked out of the office and back into our bedroom. I stood by the bed, looking down at his sleeping face. He looked so peaceful, so innocent, and I felt a chilling, terrifying calm settle over me. The fog had lifted, and in its place was a cold, hard certainty. I didn't know what the full truth was, but I was going to find out. And I was going to burn his world to the ground. It was in this state of cold fury in the dead of night, fueled by betrayal and a desperate need for irrefutable proof, that I did something I never would have imagined myself capable of. I thought about the hospital, St. Jude's, a place of immense pain, but also a place with answers. I thought about the inconsistencies, the lies. And I thought about the one thing that doesn't lie. Cameras. I sent an anonymous email to a local investigative journalist, a woman named Isabella Rossi, whose work I'd followed, known for her tenacity in uncovering institutional malfeasance. And then I sent another one from a different burner account to a victims' rights group that specialized in medical negligence. I didn't know what would come of it, but I had planted a seed. I had lit a match. Now all I could do was wait for the explosion. It came a week later in the form of that 2:17 a.m. email. The one with the subject line, St. Jude's. The one with the link that would change everything. I clicked it, and my world went from a nightmare into a living hell. The video player loaded a stark white box against the dark screen of my laptop. There was no sound, just the silent, unblinking eye of a security camera. The timestamp in the corner read 8:14 p.m. on the day Caleb died. The angle was from high in a corner, looking down on a section of a hospital corridor. It was unmistakably St. Jude's. The same pale green walls, the same polished linoleum floors I had stared at in a daze. The sign on the wall was blurry, but I could make out the letters NICU. My heart hammered against my ribs. This is it. A nurse in blue scrubs walked briskly past the camera. A doctor followed a moment later. Then from the left of the frame, Michael appeared. My Michael. He was wearing the same dark grey sweater I'd laid out for him that morning. But the man on the screen was not the devastated husband-to-be I remembered. His posture was rigid, his movements jerky and agitated. He was pacing, running a hand through his hair, his phone pressed to his ear. He looked trapped, cornered. He stopped pacing and leaned against the wall directly under the camera. He was talking animatedly, his free hand gesturing in frustration. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the panic in his body language. This was not a man waiting for news about his laboring wife. This was a man trying to control a situation that was spiraling out of his grasp. Then from the right of the frame she appeared. Jenna Reed. The redhead from the Instagram photo, the name in the emails. In the flesh. She was wearing a chic black coat, looking utterly out of place in the sterile hospital environment. She walked directly to Michael, her face a mixture of concern and impatience. I watched my breath caught in my throat as she reached him. She put a hand on his arm. He immediately flinched, pulling away, shaking his head and glancing nervously down the hallway in the direction of my delivery room. He said something to her, his expression hard and dismissive. She recoiled, her own face hardening. They began to argue, a silent, frantic pantomime of rage and recrimination. She jabbed a finger at his chest. He grabbed her wrist. She tried to pull away. It was ugly, vicious, a scene not of shared comfort, but of a clandestine meeting gone horribly wrong. This wasn't a friend offering support. This was a confrontation. And then the most damning moment of all. A doctor, the same stern-faced woman who had delivered the news of Caleb's death to me, walked towards them from the direction of the NICU. She had a clipboard in her hand. She approached Michael, her expression grave. Michael's entire demeanor shifted. The anger vanished, replaced instantly by a mask of gut-wrenching sorrow. He physically crumpled, leaning his head against the wall, covering his face with his hands. It was a performance, a switch flipped. Jenna stood by her arms crossed, watching him with a look of cold, calculating assessment. The doctor spoke to Michael for a few moments, her hand on his shoulder in a gesture of compassion. She pointed back towards the NICU. Michael shook his head vehemently. The doctor spoke again, her expression turning from sympathy to something more insistent. She seemed to be urging him towards the unit. He refused again, more forcefully this time, waving a hand dismissively. He said something that made the doctor's eyes widen in disbelief. Then she simply nodded, a look of profound sadness and perhaps a touch of disgust on her face, and walked away. Once the doctor was gone, Michael straightened up. The mask of grief fell away as quickly as it had appeared. He turned back to Jenna, his face a snarl of pure fury. He grabbed her by the arm and pulled her roughly down the corridor, away from the NICU, away from my room and out of the camera's frame. The video ended. I stared at the blank screen, the silence of the room roaring in my ears. The pieces didn't just fall into place. They slammed together with the force of a car crash. Caleb had been in the NICU. The bill was not a mistake. Sarah had not misheard. My son had been born alive. He had been alive, and he had been fighting for his life in a glass box just down the hall, and my husband, his father, had been in the corridor, arguing with his mistress. The doctor had tried to bring him to his son. She was urging him towards the unit, and he had refused. The lie was so much more monstrous than I could ever have conceived. He hadn't just lied about an affair. He hadn't just lied about the timing of Caleb's death to make his getaway easier. He had lied about our son's entire existence. He had let me believe our child was stillborn, a silent, painless tragedy, when in reality Caleb had lived. He had breathed, and he had died alone without his mother while his father refused to even go see him. Why? The answer was right there in the video, in the cold, hard expression on Jenna Reed's face, in the frantic, trapped energy of my husband, a living, breathing baby, a premature baby who would require months of intensive care and a lifetime of devotion that was not part of their plan. It was the ultimate complication. A stillbirth was a tragedy you could mourn and move on from. A critically ill child was an anchor, a lifelong responsibility that would have chained Michael to me forever. So he made a choice. He chose his affair over his son. He rewrote the narrative. He turned our son's fight for life into a story of instantaneous death. He curated my grief, managed my reality, to fit his sordid escape plan. The rage that had been simmering inside me erupted into a volcanic inferno. It was a physical force, so powerful I thought it would tear me apart. I wanted to scream. I wanted to destroy something. I wanted to walk into the bedroom and wake him up, not with words, but with my bare hands. But then a different instinct took over, a cold, chilling calm. The same calm I'd felt when I'd decided to look at his laptop. This wasn't a private matter anymore. This wasn't a marital dispute to be settled with screaming matches and thrown pottery. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had committed an act of unimaginable cruelty against his own child. He had defrauded a hospital. He had lied to doctors. And he had enlisted his mistress as a co-conspirator. The leaked footage wasn't just my personal vindication. It was evidence. I forwarded the email with the video link to Isabella Rossi, the investigative journalist. My note was simple. This is security footage from St. Jude's Medical Center on the night of May 12th. The man in the video is Michael Davenport, a prominent Austin architect. He told his wife their son was stillborn. As you can see, that was a lie. Look into the NICU records. Look into Jenna Reed of Reed PR in Chicago. Look into the memorial garden he is currently fundraising for. He didn't just have an affair. He let his son die alone to save it. And then I forwarded it to the police. The story broke 2 days later. It wasn't just a local story. It went national. Isabella Rossi's article was a masterpiece of controlled fury, laying out the facts in stark, brutal detail. "The architect of a monstrous lie," the headline screamed. The article included stills from the security footage, Michael's face contorted in anger or Jenna's cold and watchful. It detailed the timeline, the emails, the hospital bill, the confirmation from anonymous sources at St. Jude's that baby boy Davenport had indeed spent 72 hours in the NICU before succumbing to complications of his premature birth. They had tried repeatedly to get the father to come and see the child to authorize certain procedures, but he had been unreachable or unwilling to engage. The public response was instantaneous and savage. The story was a perfect storm of infidelity, betrayal, and the ultimate parental sin. Michael became a villain of almost cartoonish proportions overnight. His face was everywhere, on cable news, on tabloid websites, on social media feeds. The name Michael Davenport became synonymous with narcissistic cruelty. His firm fired him, issuing a public statement denouncing his deplorable and unethical personal conduct. The fundraising page for the memorial garden was taken down, but not before screenshots circulated online, a testament to his staggering hypocrisy. People found his social media, his firm's page, my own long-dormant accounts. The comments were a torrent of hatred. Monster. Psychopath. I hope he rots in hell. Jenna Reed was not spared. Her PR firm's website was flooded with one-star reviews. Her professional headshot was juxtaposed with the grainy security footage, still of her watching Michael's fake breakdown. She was branded the home-wrecking ghoul. Her career was incinerated in a matter of hours. I watched it all unfold from the guest room of Mark and Sarah's house. I had packed a single bag the morning after I saw the video and left before Michael woke up. I left my wedding ring on the pillow next to his head. I didn't leave a note. The entire world was about to leave him a note. My own role in the story was that of the tragic victim. The media painted me as the poor, grieving mother doubly betrayed by her monstrous husband. My photo, a smiling, pregnant shot from my Instagram, was splashed everywhere. I received an outpouring of sympathy from strangers around the world. It was surreal and strangely numbing. Their pity felt as distant and impersonal as their rage towards Michael. The only thing that felt real was the new agonizing truth about my son. Caleb. He had lived. He had a birth date and a death date. He had been a person in the world, however briefly. And this new knowledge brought with it a new kind of grief. It was sharper, more defined. I wasn't just mourning the loss of a dream anymore. I was mourning a real boy, a boy whose father had discarded him like a piece of trash. A few days after the story broke, Michael was arrested. The charge wasn't murder or anything as dramatic as the online mob wanted. It was fraud. He had knowingly provided false information to the hospital, leading them to misclassify the death and issue an incorrect death certificate. There were also questions about medical decisions that were delayed or not made because of his refusal to engage. It was a messy, complex legal situation, but for now, the fraud charge was enough to hold him. I saw his mugshot online. The handsome, charming architect was gone. In his place was a hollow-eyed, unshaven man with a haunted, terrified expression. He looked broken, but I felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction, just a vast, cold emptiness. The unveiling was complete. The perfect life, the perfect husband, the perfect grief, it had all been a lie. And now the truth in all its ugly, brutal glory was out for the world to see. I had gotten the truth. I had gotten my revenge. But as I sat in that quiet guest room, surrounded by the wreckage of my life, I had to face the terrifying question of what came next. The world loves a good villain, and Michael Davenport was tailor-made for the role. The media frenzy was relentless, a piranha-like swarm that stripped every detail of our lives down to the bone. Our wedding photos holiday, snaps my baby shower pictures. They were all repurposed as exhibits in the public trial of my husband. Each smiling image was now imbued with a sinister irony. Look at the happy couple just months before he let their baby die. I remained sequestered at Mark and Sarah's, a voluntary prisoner in their suburban guest room. They were magnificent, acting as gatekeepers against the world. They fielded calls from reporters, deflected nosy neighbors, and kept me supplied with tea and tissues. Sarah would sit with me for hours, not pressing me to talk, just offering a solid, comforting presence against the tsunami of chaos. My grief for Caleb had transformed. The murky, undefined sorrow of losing a stillborn child was replaced by the sharp, specific agony of mourning a son I never knew. I requested the full medical records from St. Jude's. They arrived in a thick manila envelope, and I read them with a forensic intensity. I learned his weight, 3 pounds, 2 ounces, his length, 15 inches. I read the nurse's notes, their neat professional script detailing his every struggle. Infant exhibiting respiratory distress. Apnea episodes increasing in frequency. Attempts to contact father unsuccessful. These clinical details were both torture and a strange kind of solace. They made him real. He wasn't just a phantom kick in my belly. He was a tiny person who had fought. The knowledge was a knife in my heart, but it was a real knife, not the phantom pain I'd been living with. I was no longer grieving a possibility. I was grieving a person, and with that came a new, focused anger. Not just at Michael, but at myself. How had I not known? How could a mother not feel on some primal cellular level that her child was alive? The guilt was a heavy cloak suffocating me. Michael denied bail due to being a flight risk, and the sheer public outrage languished in county jail. His high-powered family in Connecticut hired a top-tier legal team led by a shark of a defense attorney named Marcus Thorne, who immediately went on the offensive. Thorne's strategy was clear paint Michael not as a monster, but as a man who had suffered a profound psychological break. Mr. Davenport was under unimaginable stress. Thorne declared on the courthouse steps, his voice oozing sincerity. The impending birth, the pressures of his career, and a marriage that was already quietly fracturing led to a dissociative episode. He created a false narrative, not out of malice, but because his mind simply could not cope with the reality of his son's critical condition. This is not a case of fraud. It's a case of profound mental trauma. It was a brilliant, insidious defense. It attempted to reclaim the narrative of grief that Michael himself had so expertly woven. I watched the press conference on TV, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. A psychological break. He hadn't had a break. He'd had a plan. The emails to Jenna were proof of that. Speaking of Jenna, she had vanished. Her social media was deleted, her firm's website was offline, and her office was shuttered. The press couldn't find her. But the police did. She was located in a luxury spa resort in Arizona, having fled Chicago the day the story broke. They brought her back to Austin for questioning. She was not charged with a crime, she had broken no laws, but she was a material witness, and facing the ruin of her career and the full force of public condemnation, she decided to save herself. She made a deal with the prosecutors for immunity in exchange for her testimony. Her deposition was leaked to the press, of course. Every sordid detail. She recounted how she and Michael had met, the thrill of their affair, their shared fantasy of a future together. And then she came to the part about the baby. According to Jenna, the pregnancy had been a crisis point. Michael had assured her he would leave me, but the baby complicated everything. Her version of events painted Michael as weak and indecisive a man, panicking as his carefully compartmentalized life began to converge. He told me the baby would trap him, her deposition read. He said that if the baby was born healthy, he'd never be able to leave. The guilt would be too much, the societal pressure too great. We were in the hotel in Chicago when Amelia went into labor. He was a mess. He kept saying, "This is a disaster. This ruins everything." The most chilling part of her testimony concerned the hours at the hospital. She admitted to going there to confront him, to demand he make a choice. And she described the moment he learned Caleb was alive, but critically ill. He came out of the delivery area, and his face was white, she stated. He said, "It's alive, but it's sick. They don't think it's going to make it." And then he looked at me, and I saw a look in his eye. It was cold, calculating. He said, this could be a way out, a clean break. He decided right then and there. He told me the plan he would tell Amelia the baby was stillborn. He said it would be kinder that way. A quick, tragic end, instead of weeks or months of false hope. He said it would let them grieve together, and then, when the time was right, they could go their separate ways. He said it was the only way to manage the situation without destroying everyone. Kinder. He had called this monstrous selfish deception an act of kindness. He had appointed himself the arbiter of my grief, the editor of my reality, to facilitate his escape into a new life. Jenna's testimony destroyed Marcus Thorne's psychological break defense. This wasn't a man unmoored from reality. This was a man executing a premeditated, cold-blooded plan. The fallout from Jenna's deposition was a second explosion ripping through what little was left of our social circle. People were forced to take sides. My side was easy: the wronged wife, the grieving mother. His was impossible. His friends, his colleagues, even some of his family publicly disavowed him. He was utterly alone. One evening, Mark came into the guest room, a grim look on his face. "You got a letter," he said, holding it out as if it were contaminated. "From him. It was sent here from his lawyer." I took it from him, my hand steady. I hadn't heard a single word from Michael since I'd left. No calls, no texts, no emails. Just the public pronouncements of his lawyer. I slit the envelope open. The letter was written on a piece of yellow legal paper, his familiar architectural script looking alien and obscene. "Amelia, I know you will never forgive me. I don't expect you to. I don't forgive myself." Listening to Thorne talk in court, listening to what Jenna said, it's like hearing about a stranger, a monster. I don't know who that man was. The pressure, the lies, it all just avalanched. I was suffocating and I made a choice. A terrible, unforgivable choice. I see his face now, Amy. The nurses at St. Jude's, they showed me a picture. After it was over. I wouldn't look at the time. I refused. But they put a photograph in my discharge file. I found it when I was looking for paperwork for Thorne. I've been looking at it every night here in my cell. He looked like you. He had your nose. I destroyed everything. I destroyed you. I destroyed our son. I destroyed myself. I know sorry is a pathetic, meaningless word. It's an insult. But it's the only one I have. Don't let this destroy you. Please. You are a good person. You deserved a good life, a good husband. You deserved to be Caleb's mother. And I stole that from you. Michael. I read the letter twice. There was no rage left in me. No fire. Just a profound, bone-deep weariness. His apology, his self-pity, his supposed realization, it was all too little too late. It was the pathetic whimper of a man who had been caught. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry for the consequences. He looked like you. He had your nose. The words were meant to be a bridge, a shared detail of our son. But all it did was highlight the chasm between us. He had a photograph, a picture of our son's face. And he had kept that from me, too. Another secret, another layer of his betrayal. I folded the letter neatly. I did not rip it up. I did not burn it. I placed it in the manila envelope with Caleb's medical records. It was just one more piece of evidence in the case file of my shattered life. The unraveling was almost complete. The lies had all been exposed. The villain had been caged, and the truth was a harsh, unforgiving glare. All that was left was the trial, and the daunting task of figuring out how to live in the scorched earth he had left behind. The trial of Michael Davenport was a spectacle. It felt less like a legal proceeding and more like the final act of a grim, nationally televised play. I was there for every moment, a silent, black-clad figure in the front row. I refused to let the media's portrayal of me as a fragile, broken victim define me. I needed to bear witness. I owed it to Caleb. Michael, clad in an ill-fitting suit, looked like a ghost. The charm and confidence that had once been his armor were gone, replaced by a hollowed-out resignation. He rarely looked at me. When our eyes did meet across the courtroom, his were filled with a desperate, pleading shame. I felt nothing. It was like looking at a stranger. The prosecution, armed with the security footage, the emails and Jenna Reed's damning testimony, laid out their case with brutal efficiency. They painted a picture of a cold, narcissistic man who viewed his own child as a complication to be managed. They called nurses from St. Jude's to the stand who testified through tears about baby boy Davenport's fight for life and their frustrating, futile attempts to get his father involved. He told me on the phone, "There's no point in me coming down there. It's a foregone conclusion." One veteran NICU nurse testified, her voice thick with contempt. "I've been doing this for 30 years. I've seen parents in denial, in shock, in every state of grief imaginable. I have never, ever seen a parent so indifferent." The defense, hamstrung by Jenna's testimony, did their best to salvage the psychological break narrative, but it rang hollow. Marcus Thorne put a psychiatrist on the stand who spoke of narcissistic personality disorder and acute stress reactions. But under cross-examination, even he had to admit that Michael's actions, the meticulous lies, the cover-up, the manipulation of me demonstrated a high degree of planning and cognitive function, not a break from reality. The moment that will forever be seared into my memory was when the prosecution introduced the photograph of Caleb into evidence, the one Michael had mentioned in his letter. They had retrieved it from his files. An evidence technician projected it onto the large screens in the courtroom. And there he was, my son. He was so tiny, nestled in a tangle of wires and tubes. His skin was translucent, his eyes were closed, and his tiny chest was still. But he was beautiful. He was perfect. He had my nose, and a shock of dark hair, just like Michael's. A sound escaped my lips, a raw, guttural sob that I couldn't contain. The courtroom, which had been buzzing with whispers, fell utterly silent. In that moment, he was not baby boy Davenport, the tragic figure in a news story. He was Caleb, my Caleb, and the world was finally seeing him. I saw Michael crumple at the defendant's table, his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. For the first time, his grief looked real, but it was a selfish grief. Grief for himself, for the life he'd lost, the man he'd failed to be. It had nothing to do with the tiny boy on the screen. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. The verdict was guilty. Guilty of felony fraud. Guilty of reckless endangerment. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman, delivered the sentence a week later. She spoke directly to Michael, her voice dripping with scorn. "You did not just lie, Mr. Davenport," she said, her eyes boring into him. "You constructed an alternate reality of unimaginable cruelty. You weaponized your wife's grief and love for you to cover your own pathetic infidelities. You treated the life and death of your own son as an inconvenience to be managed. Your crime is not just against the state or the hospital. It is a crime against humanity, against the very definition of fatherhood. It is one of the most profound acts of narcissistic cruelty I have ever witnessed from this bench." She sentenced him to the maximum possible term, 10 years in state prison. A gasp went through the courtroom. 10 years. It was a harsh sentence for fraud, but it was clear the judge was sentencing the moral crime, not just the legal one. I walked out of the courthouse into a sea of cameras and reporters. I didn't stop. I just kept walking, Mark and Sarah flanking me like bodyguards. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt quiet. The noise that had been roaring in my head for months had finally subsided. It was over. The weeks and months that followed were a slow, painful process of rebuilding. I sold the house, the one with the beige walls and the nursery that had become a mausoleum. I couldn't bear to be in it another second. I took my half of the assets and moved into a small, bright apartment in a different part of Austin, a part of the city that held no memories of him. I legally changed my last name back to my maiden name, Amelia Shelton. It was a small act, but a significant one. I was no longer Amelia Davenport. That woman, the one who believed in the Pottery Barn fantasy, was gone. She had died with Caleb. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in trauma and grief. We talked about Caleb. We talked about Michael. We talked about the complex, tangled knot of my own guilt and rage. She helped me understand that I couldn't have known that I was the victim of a master manipulator, and that my body and mind, under the trauma of childbirth and what I believed was catastrophic loss, had been in survival mode. I never spoke to Michael again. His lawyers reached out regarding the divorce proceedings, which were swift and uncontested. He signed everything, gave me everything I asked for. It was his final futile act of penance. I heard through the grapevine that Jenna Reed had moved to another state, changed her name, and was attempting to start over forever, branded by her association with the case. I found I didn't have the energy to hate her. She was just another piece of wreckage in the blast zone of Michael's lies. My life now is quiet. It is small. I still work as a graphic designer, but I find my greatest solace in volunteering at a local animal shelter. The uncomplicated, unconditional affection of the abandoned dogs and cats is a balm to my soul. I have a framed copy of Caleb's photograph on my nightstand. It's the only picture I have of him, the one from the courtroom. I look at it every day. I tell him good morning and I tell him good night. I tell him about my day. I tell him that I love him. I am in my own quiet way, finally getting to be his mother. The grief for him will never go away. It has become a part of me, a shadow that walks beside me. But it is no longer an all-consuming darkness. Sometimes it is even a source of strength. It reminds me of what is real, of what is important. It reminds me of the devastating cost of lies. I don't know if I will ever trust anyone fully again. I don't know if I will ever remarry or have more children. The future is not a bright, shining path anymore. It is a quiet, winding road, and I am taking it one step at a time. I have survived the unimaginable. I have walked through the fire of the ugliest of truths and come out on the other side. I am scarred. I am changed. But I am still here. And in the quiet of my new life, for the first time in a very long time, that feels like enough. The story of Amelia and Michael is a harrowing reminder that sometimes the most devastating monsters are the ones sleeping right beside us, hidden behind a mask of love and concern. It's a story about the corrosive power of lies and the unimaginable depths of betrayal. But it's also a story of survival of a woman who walked through an inferno of public humiliation and private agony to reclaim her own truth and find a way to honor the son who was stolen from her twice. If this story touched you, if it made you think, if it made you feel, please take a moment to hit that like button to help us share it with more people. More importantly, leave a comment below. What part of Amelia's story resonated with you the most? And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss another story that peels back the layers of the human experience and reveals the truth, no matter how shocking it might be. Thank you for listening.